Indonesia. So welcome to all of you. I want to start out by putting up a slide from Dahlia about the global state of democracy, because I think it will outline, we heard about the overview of the whole survey. What struck me about this was that the main finding from this was that 41% of the global population, that's a pretty huge number, think that there is not enough democracy in their country. And just to pull out two of the statistics, in Indonesia, 64%, a substantial majority, say there's not enough democracy in their country. That's within the top 5 complainants countries. And in the Philippines, strangely, I would say only 21% say that there's not enough democracy. So Duterte has done a number on Filipinos to think that they've got plenty of democracy. First, maybe we can just rapidly respond to that. Dino, why don't you start out with why do you think your countrymen in Indonesia are so pessimistic? I mean, we were there when democracy launched, the fall of Suharto, and 1998, 21 years ago now, everyone was so optimistic. Why the downward decline now?
Well, first I need to say that at the elections that we just had in Indonesia, voting turnout was very high. It was over 80%, I think closer to 85%, which means that people are still optimistic about democracy. But you are right in the sense that the last class of political leadership, I mean, particularly the parliamentarians, were, I think, one of the worst class of parliamentarians. We had about 220 parliamentarians at the national and local level nabbed for corruption. The productivity was very low. At the national level, only 10 laws were passed out of 60 draft laws. A number of parliamentarians were nabbed for using drugs, for doing criminal activities, and so on and so on. So there is a crisis of confidence in politicians and in the institution of parliaments. And although the democracy remains strong, electoral elections are like clockwork every 5 years, but the quality of politics is deteriorating. And I think this is why the people think democracy must do a better job in producing better leaders. And the challenge is if the next class of leaders that are emerging now after this election will be significantly better than the previous class of leaders.
So Maria, I'm curious, because Rappler dedicates its time to truth-telling, fact-finding in the Philippines, and as a result, you have published a lot of stories about corruption in Duterte's government, abuses, human rights violations, extrajudicial killings. I could go on. So given that you're the largest online media platform in the Philippines, you have huge readership, you're hugely prominent because the president has targeted you and arrested you a number of times. I think at least 8 times you've had to post bail. So given all of those factors together, why are 80% of Filipinos thinking we're good, democracy's good?
I think you have to look at what the stats actually say, right? It's 29%.
21% who think there's not enough.
Think there's not enough.
Which means 79% think it's pretty good.
It's good. Okay. So I think one of the things you have to look at is that Filipinos spend the most time online and the most time on social media globally. We are a cautionary tale for you in the sense that the internet, social media tech platforms have really shown that information is power. And part of that statistic you can read in 2 ways, right? Part of our biggest problem right now is we don't know what the facts are. And the first casualty in the war for truth is exactly how many people have been killed in the drug war. Depending on who you talk to, the police will say it's a little more than 5,000 people. They admit to 5,000 people killing that since July 2016. If you talk to the human rights groups, they'll say at least 27,000 people since July 2016. That's a huge number. And then you go on from there. Why are we like you and why should you be worried? Number one, if you have no facts, you cannot have trust. If you don't have trust, you do not have truth of any sort, right? Truth and trust will go hand in hand with each other. And if you don't have truth nor trust, you're not going to have democracy. So I look at that number actually the opposite way, which is it is so chaotic, it's actually quite Putin-esque. The goal of Russian disinformation is to make everyone doubt, to actually systematically tear down trust in any institution, journalists and activists, human rights activists at the front line. And if that happens in the society, then the voice with the loudest megaphone wins.
I want to come back to you on the question of tech and platforms, because you said Filipinos are online more than anyone in the world. So when we circle back, I want to hear more about the effect that you think Facebook and other social media platforms have had on democracy in the Philippines. But first, President Banda, I want to ask you, I want to start with a very basic question. We didn't have a number from Malawi from that survey, but I'll just make it basic for everyone, which is democracy working in Africa right now?
Yes and no. Yes, because our wealth as Africa are women and young people. And what is happening increasingly is that they are standing up and demanding more. They are questioning authority more than ever before. They are holding leaders accountable, whether they like it or not. They're going on the street more than ever before. They're using technology more than ever before. But more and more we see that young people are organizing themselves, mobilizing themselves, raising their voices in order to be heard, and so are women. So yes, because we see more people wanting to participate in democratic processes, in elections, going to parliament, organizing themselves, even at grassroots. No, because I feel, because I've been a leader myself, that we leaders are not listening. We're not paying attention to what the young people and the women are saying. We believe we are back. I mean, the youth and the women are so far ahead of us. And because of that, we find the protests, we find that we are ignoring, providing opportunities, responding to their needs, because they are not asking for too much. They are just asking us to be straightforward, to stop corruption in order for the resources to go into their development, their opportunities, their education. And until and unless we begin to listen to that, we will find ourselves in a situation where democracy, yes, but when we get to elections, it's a facade. Because the leaders want to be elected regardless. So they will rig the election. And they will corrupt everybody along the way. Because the ordinary people will want the leaders of their choice. But that increasingly is not happening. So there's that crisis. So yes, it is, democracy is working because people know what are their rights and they're demanding for accountability, inclusion, and then us as leaders are not getting it. And for us as leaders also, I feel that democracy cannot work where in some countries 60% of the people are not educated. In Malawi, over 70% of the people cannot read and write. So when they come to exercise their right, the chances are so high that during elections they're exploited. Yeah, those that have got money, that are in the know, they will get the people that are ignorant but that are voters and exploit them or buy their vote. So yes and no.
Well, this segues really nicely into something that I want to ask Dino, because certainly in the late 90s, early 2000s, Indonesia was held up as an emerging democracy and as a model for others. Now that's not the case. And I've heard you talk about this existential threat to democracies and specifically to Indonesia coming from what you call the three returns. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, the three returns that we need to be aware of, and also for other democracies. One is the return of authoritarianism, or even you would call it soft authoritarianism. It may not be systemic, but it is a form whereby power goes unchecked, and the restraint of power is becoming less and less, because this democracy requires discipline, and if this discipline is not exercised, then you will have a problem. And secondly, the return of new forms of corruption. You know, we're seeing this in Malaysia with what happened with former Prime Minister Najib. Is less blatant, right? But they're acquiring new ways of corruption in the country. And the last is the new form of radicalism and terrorism. In Indonesia last year, we were shocked to see, for the first time in the world, a whole family suicide bomber, which bombed Christian churches in Surabaya. So it's not just one man, but this one man and the wife and 3 or 4 kids brought together to commit acts of suicide bombing. And we were surprised that terrorism has mutated in a certain way. So I think these 3 things, the return of new forms of authoritarianism, new form of corruption, and new form of radicalism, not just for Indonesia, but for the rest of democracies in Asia, we need to watch for.
Maria, I know you had some thoughts, some strong thoughts about the tech panel this morning. So let me give you an opportunity to air those, playing off the question really, what role does democracy play in either promoting or eroding democracy globally now?
Social media, right? What role does, and it was great. I'm going to try to put together the first panel and then the one on the EU panel, which was really fascinating. I think I'll speak from experience. 97% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook is our internet. Facebook and I, we're frenemies. We love each other, we hate each other. We love each other because Rappler is a startup. We helped spread Facebook, Twitter, social media in the Philippines, precisely because the kind of bottom-up approach, right? I was tired of throwing these stories into the black hole and then waiting for government. We decided we can use this technology and go build institutions bottom-up. But what happened? Everything was going well from 2012 to 2016. But all hell broke loose in 2016. And I think this coincides with kind of this move towards populism globally. 2014, Modi was elected in India. Jokowi ran up against Prabowo in Indonesia, and Prabowo lost by just a smidgen. And then you saw this kind of movement in all other parts of the world. Think of social media as the accelerant that was thrown into this mix. There was great yearning in a very complex world to have someone tell you what to do, to have someone who knows all the answers. So social media played into this, right? So if that's the accelerant, I'll talk about it from the experience of the Philippines.
And let me just clarify, because not everyone here is a native English speaker. When you're saying accelerant, what you really mean is kerosene on a fire, if I'm understanding.
Worse.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you think about like this hall, there's a little fire burning over there, and then this technology came in, and it's all on fire now. We're on fire, and the stats will play it out starting November 2017. So when did all hell break loose? 2016. And I still push it out as when instant articles came in, all the news groups went on board. The world's largest distributor of news became social media. And while they took the distribution of news, they did not take the gatekeeping role of journalists.
Mm-hmm. The role of editors,
role, right?
That is so important to decide what is news, what is not news, what fact check, truth.
Actually, what facts are, right? Yeah. If we don't agree that there are 2, 4, 6 bottles of water there and one is open, how can we begin to talk about this little table? That's kind of the metaphor for democracy, right? If we can't agree on the facts, we don't have democracy. And what we've seen in 2016, Duterte was elected in May. A month later, Brexit happened. In August, we had the data that was coming out of the Philippines. That was so alarming. And I went to Singapore and I said, guys, look at this. If you don't do something about this, Trump, actually, the US elections are in November and Trump could win. In August of 2016, that didn't seem like it was going to happen, and we all laughed. After he won, I was asked for the data again. So what have we seen? information operations. In October of 2016, we came out with a series of stories that showed you how we were being systematically attacked using hate, right? Inciting to hate, something we called patriotic trolling, online state-sponsored hate to either stifle, pound you to silence, or to incite violence. And we've seen that spread through different countries around the world. And I'll end with the stats. November 2017, Freedom House said that in at least 28 countries around the world, cheap armies on social media was rolling back democracy. A year later, in 2018, Oxford University's computational research project said that the number of countries had gone up to 48. What is it in 2019? I'm waiting. I think the first ones are coming out. So for me, let's fix this. And here's the last part, right? This is all new technology, and this is only information. Let's not even talk about the kind of data that is being gathered about all of us that can actually predict what our own choices are going to be. Let's push that aside. Let's just talk about information as power and how it leads to geopolitical power. What we've seen in the Philippines, because we've done digital forensics, is that this kind of information operation, state-sponsored, that aims and targets, and I speak from experience, after we came out with our three-part series in October 2016, I had 90 hate messages per hour. That's kind of a little bit mind-blowing. The first, it's a new weapon against journalists, against any human rights activist on the front line. After that,
not only directed at you, but threatening murder and other horrible things that they said they were going to do to you.
All sorts of nice things. Yeah. And it didn't get better. But what did happen is we told the people about it, and that's our only defense, and it is our only weapon, which goes back to the mission of journalism. You have to shine the light. You got to tell people they're being manipulated, and that's where we go now. So what did we find? We found our homegrown groups were actually connected. We found links to the Internet Research Agency, Russian disinformation. We found links to the alt-right in Canada and the alt-right in the US. This is the ecosystem, the information ecosystem in the Philippines. Let's not talk about Indonesia. We're only 100 million people, 270 million now. So largest Twitter city in the world, Jakarta. So this is fundamental. Let's get this right. I'll end with this thing, which is in the end, I'm not running after Facebook saying it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. Yeah, it is your fault. But you know what? You're so smart. Facebook did break democracy, but it's now working to fix it. We're one of Facebook's fact-checking partners in the Philippines. We check the facts. Once we figure out that this is a lie, we then look at the networks that spread the lies. That's fascinating to me. That's digital forensics, it's investigative journalism. And I'm hoping that Facebook will be as good as when it pivoted to mobile. It did it successfully in 2 years. We're a year in now. Starting January 2018, Facebook is moving fast on the takedowns. We need to take a look at the Russian and Iranian and Indonesian. They've done 2 takedowns in Indonesia, 3 in the Philippines. I'm obsessive about this stuff because I think so much in all of our countries depends on this.
Takedowns of false information, false accounts, accounts that are posing as something else and spreading disinformation. This is a whole other conversation that I hope that over dinner this evening or over the reception that people will come to you, come to me and talk about this because we're both obsessed with it. But one reaction to that is that you say it's important for the press to tell people they're being manipulated. Of course, I agree with you, but I've also spent a couple years working on the fact that trust in media in democracies is so low now, particularly in the United States, that we can tell people that they're being manipulated till the cows come home. If there are people who believe that the media, the free press is actually fake news, or who've been convinced that we're not telling the truth, and some of this is the fault of media organizations that have not done a good job of building or maintaining trust of their viewership and their readership. But the point is, it's not so easy as saying, we're telling you you're being manipulated. If people don't believe you, that doesn't work very well.
But that's also why I think we need to move the discourse away from kind of like in the Philippines, you know, we have Good Friday, we flagellate ourselves. Yes, Digital has introduced many things, and in the United States, trust could be low. But what you don't count on is something that we have data to prove in the Philippines. There is a systematic attack against journalists globally. Let's just talk about, the spread of one word. This is something we're working on with other countries, with other journalists in other countries. The term prostitutes began in the United States, spread to India. Prostitutes, prostitutes. US, India, South Africa, the Philippines. It pops up in the Philippines with the seed account, the anchor account that is spreading disinformation that is pro-Duterte, right? So I would say it's this. I think about solutions, short, medium, long term, and we can't just keep saying, oh gosh, we have no trust, we have no trust. The short-term solution is for social media to actually stop the virus from coming into the body politic of democracy. So that's the first step, right? Stop the lies spreading faster than truth, than facts. All of the data shows you that anger spreads lies faster. If we can do that, and there's lots of things in the West that's problematic because you look at it as content, why not look at the networks of disinformation and stop the impunity of information operations? Look at the Mueller report. There's great evidence in that of Russian disinformation. If the United States fails to hold the Russians to account for it, it creates a new normal. The same. These are new normals. We need to say this is an existential moment that will determine what our future is going to look like, what the future democracy will look like.
Former Special Counsel Bob Mueller will now be testifying on July 17th. That gives everyone in this room a little under 2 weeks to read the Mueller report in full. So that's your next job. I want to remind everyone that we are encouraging audience questions. You can ask via the app. You can also ask on the Facebook live stream or on the Facebook page of Alliance of Democracies. President Banda, I want to ask you, there is this perception outside of Africa anyway, that women have been missing in the African democratic process. You yourself have been viewed as a pioneer. So I want to ask you, first of all, why are women missing, if that's our perception on the outside, and what makes women key to the democratic process in Africa?
First, let me correct that perception.
Please
women have not been missing. In fact, women participated in democracy or in leadership long before colonization on the continent of Africa. I don't want to go into that history, but suffice to say that we have not done badly as Africa in allowing women to participate in leadership. In fact, we believe that the world has a thing or two to learn from Africa, because we have had 5 female presidents. And I know that there are some parts of this world with longer democracies, 200 years old, where a woman hasn't yet gone to State House.
I could think of some.
Yeah, so we haven't done badly. We have had 5 women, so it has been Liberia, Central African Republic, Mauritius, Malawi, and Ethiopia. So we've done well, and the country with the highest number of women in parliament is on the continent of Africa, globally. Rwanda has 69%.
What percent?
69.
69%. Is that due to quotas, or is it self-grown?
Well, I think it's self-grown. I don't want to answer that question without checking, but it's 69%. And the country after country now, the leaders realize that it's the right thing to do, to have more women participate at cabinet level. So we are having leaders appoint 50-50 women members of cabinet. President Ramaphosa just did that. Ethiopia is another. In Namibia, it's now the zebra concept, where if the president is male, the vice president shall be female, all the way down. So I wouldn't say that we are missing. In fact, people say when most countries were colonized, that's when women were ignored.
Pushed out of the picture.
Were pushed out of the picture.
During colonization.
When our brothers started agitating for self-rule, women rose to the occasion again. So the Winnie Mandelas, Albertina Sissoul, Rose Chivambo, women across Africa stood up. And, but what I can say is that with that picture, that promise, there's still a lot more that we need to do. I will forever be grateful to the American government that gave me an opportunity over the past 4 years to research on African women's participation in leadership. And so I bumped into this scientific fact that says that leaders are born, that they're only born with 30% leadership traits, that 70% has to be added on by society, going to school, being mentored, tertiary education, and so on. So my question at that point was, then what is happening to the African girl child who is locked up in abject poverty? How do we take advantage of the 30%? Because I believe that we need to continue to build African women leaders if we are going to tackle all the challenges that people face. And so I looked at the African girl child age 0 to 10. In fact, I've written a book that anybody can read on the website of the Center for Global Development, because they're the ones that supported me. And I'm looking at all the issues that could stand on the way of this African girl child so that we might lose the 30%. So it's work in progress. We need to continue to provide support. Women lack training, they lack resources, financial resources, in order to stand for elected office. But also it is the abuse, and it is the social media, and it is the fake news. I don't even like using that word. Now here it's misinformation and disinformation. To an extent that women get abused while standing for office. We've just gone through election in Malawi. Women were actually being stripped naked, trying to participate in elected office in politics. So my position is that while Africa has done well, but there's also so much that needs to be done.
Well, let me ask you, because you're one of those 5 women pioneer presidents on the continent that you described, would you be willing to share some of your personal experiences in your journey to leadership?
Wow.
We have a lot of emerging leaders in the audience, and yesterday was really focused on young leaders from around the world with all the democracy couch sessions. I'm sure a lot of the young women leaders especially, but men too, these emerging leaders, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, what we have done also in Africa is to organize ourselves in trying to push to participate fully in our democracies, is also to organize ourselves into networks like the African Women Network, Leaders Network, at the African Union, supported by the UN Women, in order to continue to raise our voices and to mobilize fellow women and youth. But you asked me a specific question on what was my experience going up the ladder. I would like to say that African men have realized that they have to open space for women to participate in leadership, to sit at the formulating table. And so I would like to pay tribute to, because I don't want to pretend or to lie. I don't remember one single day when I was in office when a man treated me any differently.
Well, you were fortunate compared to the Malawian women you were saying who were getting stripped naked.
Yes, that is why it is important for us, those of us who get into leadership, to organize ourselves, because that's happening at the very low level, and that discourages women from coming up. But I must say that the challenges that I faced were from my fellow professional women. Yeah, so but ordinary women, once you gain their trust and they believe in you, because you've been transparent and accountable all along your career, they will stand by you and with you. The challenge, you get the challenge as you get into leadership, it's not for male counterparts, it's from your own fellow women. Yeah, so the way I went around that was to show that when a woman gets into leadership, they appoint fellow women. So for the first time in Malawi, when I became president, I appointed a chief justice that was female, head of civil service that was female, solicitor general that was female, 7 district commissioners. And then the women begin to see the benefit of having a woman at the top. So But I think that the challenge mainly was the way I came in as president. Because I was elected vice president and running mate to my president then. The constitution was very clear that if anything happens to him halfway, the vice president becomes the president. Mm-hmm. And I think it wasn't part of his plan to die midway. and, and there were so many people that when he suddenly died of heart attack, there are so many people that struggled. And it took 72 hours, 3 days, for them to accept that I can take oath, that I can become president. And it took the international community and my army commander to intervene, to insist and to force our way through until I took oath on the third day. But once that happened, and I appointed my cabinet from across the board, and by showing that you can be inclusive and you can bring peace and forgiveness among the people of your country, and by engaging the people, every decision that you made, because the day I went into office, there was no fuel for a day. There was no electricity. There was no food for 2 million people. So for you to
You mean it was done on purpose to sabotage you?
No.
Oh.
That's where the economy was, yeah. But if you engage the people, no matter how ordinary, and let them know step by step what you're trying to do, they'll stand with you and by you.
Well, that's a lesson a lot of our countries could learn from. Obviously, in the United States, women have not done a great job of supporting other women. That may be changing, but it's a good example you give. We've got an audience question here that I'd like to put to you, Dino, which is, what are some examples of positive democratic developments in the world today? It can't all be bad. So you talked about the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse that might return to us. That was pretty shocking. So what are some of the positive things you're seeing, whether perhaps not in Indonesia, but in other neighboring countries?
Well, certainly for Indonesia, the experience has been wonderful. Right. What do I mean by it? There used to be a time when I first joined government 3 decades ago. We used to be told that you have to choose between democracy or development. You can't have both. And we proved that, yes, we can have democracy and development. And to connect to what Prime Minister Rasmussen said earlier, democracy and stability. You know, we used to be told that you can't have both, but Indonesia has had democracy and stability. You know, our reform and democracy has been on for about 20 years, and we've had many stable turnover of governments. We also were told that once you have democracy, you will end up like Yugoslavia or Soviet Union, broken apart into pieces. But what happened, in fact, yes, East Timor separated from Indonesia, but after that, Indonesia has become even more united and more coherent. And the other myth that we dispelled was democracy, Islam, and modernity, and women's rights. Because, you know, there are some in the Muslim world who believe that democracy and Islam are not compatible. But we prove that our democracy grew, but Islamic parties also sprung up, but they all are very pro-democratic and pro-modernization. So the world of democracy, which many Indonesians were skeptical about before 1999, really has been a surprising, new, fresh, and wonderful development. And I can tell you that Indonesia has reached a point of no return where democracy is irreversible. I mean, you can't say this in Thailand, right? You can't say this in Myanmar or Egypt yet, right? But in Indonesia, there is no prospect of military coup. And our democracy is having problems, like I said, its ability to choose good leaders and so on.
Corruption and inefficiency, and also some quasi-authoritarian actions or by the government as well. But one stat that is important, regardless of the stat you mentioned about how many % of Indonesians feel they're not happy with so on and so on. 85% of Indonesians were asked, is the country under democracy heading in the right direction? Yeah. No matter what they think of the president or the opposition or so on, the 85% said yes. And I think that is by far the biggest political asset for a nation to grow. Yeah. Great. All right,
But,
with a short...
as far as Africa is concerned, I think Botswana and Ghana But Botswana should be an example that the whole world can look at as a democracy that's working. And I always look at the resources, the natural resources they have. And Africa is rich in natural resources. But I think we can learn a lot from Botswana. That those of us that are leaders must look at the natural resources of our nations as property of the people that we serve, not ours. And for that reason, Botswana has looked after those natural resources, because I say this because next door, they have also got natural resources. And the president of next door, who was there before, actually said, oh, we made $15 billion from our diamonds, but I don't know what happened to the money. I lost it. While next door, in Botswana, every citizen of that country knows that my country is rich and I'm benefiting. Education is free all the way to tertiary. Medical services are free all the way. And if you find land, government will come, provide a tractor, provide seed. It's a happy nation. They have looked after their resources. And as a result, I think 5 or 6 presidents, changing hands, peaceful transitions. Yeah.
Maria, you get the last word. We have a short time left. So first, your thoughts on positive developments, and also let me ask you some potential solutions, keeping on this positive note. What do you see as the press's role in some potential solutions for the Philippines and beyond?
I think crisis is opportunity, to quote China. Crisis is opportunity. You don't know who you are until you're forced to fight for it. And our young generation is finding that out. I think old power needs to understand new power, tech, and new power needs to understand exactly how it's disrupted old power. So this opens up a whole world of possibilities. The reason, take it from Rappler. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. I've posted bail 8 times. I've been arrested twice. I've been detained once. And
even coming here, every time you try to make a foreign trip to talk to the world, that's a challenge, a legal challenge.
I have to pay more than $60,000 just to be free, right? Having said that, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because the mission of journalism has never been stronger. We know this is necessary. Rappler is stronger because of it. We pivoted our business model because we were forced to. And I think, maybe 1986 people power in the Philippines was too easy. We coined the term peaceful people power. And this is it. I think this moment is incredibly important. We're all going to look back a decade from now. We're going to say, how did we do this? And the last point for me that is, very inspiring is we can't do this alone. Local is global. Global is local. The problems in each of our countries cannot be solved by our countries alone. The problem is global. And these global solutions need to hit each of our countries as well. We couldn't have survived. There are so many people that are helping us with our legal defense fund. Covington, one of the largest in Washington, D.C., has been so supportive, and they've just they're moving us forward. Because, of course, I think we're going to lose the cases, 11 cases in 14 months. But I try not to focus on the negative.
Not everyone in the audience may know these are trumped-up tax evasion charges that are being used against you and Rappler as a way to try to silence your news organization.
So many more than tax evasion. There's a cyber libel charge. The first arrest that happened to me was a story we published 7 years ago before the law we allegedly violated was even enacted. So I've run out of synonyms for the word ridiculous, but I look ahead and try to be positive, because here's that last part. If we do not have positive energy, we cannot create a better future. It has to come to that.
All right, well, on that rousing note, please join me in thanking our terrific panel for their contributions. Thank you so much. I want to remind everyone we have a coffee break now, and a reminder that there are work lounges on the balcony level if you need to take a break, but otherwise please mingle with your co-participants. This is where the real action and behind the scenes discussion about democracy gets done. Please be back promptly in 30 minutes when we're going to start again. Thank you.